The Raider is a chassis system designed by Flux Defense specifically for the Sig Sauer P320, allowing users to affix a brace or stock to their pistols by swapping the lower frame of the P320 for the Flux chassis. The P320 is an especially good candidate for this type of chassis since it is a modular design which allows the trigger mechanism to be removed entirely from the lower frame. The Raider has been around for a number of years now, but it seems like ever since it was released, the demand was higher than expected, and so it was perpetually out of stock. As of late last year, they seem to have fixed up some of the supply chain issues, although with the accessibility, the demand is kept up, and so you're still going to find them out of stock very often. And even though there was a period where they were pretty accessible, they're still pretty rare from what I can tell. So maybe people are still having trouble getting their hands on them, maybe it's just a bit too niche, maybe it hasn't caught on yet, or maybe it's a perpetual tendency of SIG pistols to spontaneously fire and explode that's turned some people off to the platform. In any case, now that I've run mine for a bit, I'd like to share my thoughts in case you are considering purchasing one for yourself. So full disclosures here, the SIG P320 M17 was my first gun, the first one I ever purchased, handgun or rifle. And so while I never really liked the way it shot, or I should say the way I shot it, it holds a special place in my heart. For me, upgrading to the Flux Raider was a no-brainer since I already had a P320 that was mostly unused except sometimes serving as a nightstand gun. I bought this Flux with my own money. They have not paid me to do this video, and they don't really know anything about it either. When I did purchase it, I did send an email to them asking them to speed up the fulfillment process so that I could get to testing, which they did do, which is very kind, but other than that, they have contributed nothing to this video. At this point, I've put something like 500 rounds through the Flux, which is less than I would typically say is sufficient for review. However, this is a somewhat unique case in that I've put plenty of rounds through half of the platform, the P320. So this is less of a review of the whole system as much as it is an overview of the manual of arms and the setup that I have found to work well with the Raider in my time with it so far. Let's start with the manual of arms. The first thing to call out is that this is definitely not a speed load system, despite what it says. It's definitely not a vertical foregrip either. I know this because it says right here, not a VFG. But in practice, it functions very similarly to a vertical foregrip, so we'll call it a stability surface. And that's what it is. You should not be using this as a speed reloader, contrary to what Flux Defense Marketing tells you, and all the videos on YouTube and Instagram of people using it in just that way. At most, it's an emergency magazine holder, but for most normal circumstances, it is a place to put your support hand when engaging targets. As soon as you remove the magazine, this becomes a significantly worse stability surface, so don't do that. And when you don't treat the magazine here as something that you're going to be drawing on very often, it allows you to put a shorter magazine, the 17-round magazine, in this position, which creates a nice level surface for the Flux and lessens the snag hazard when you're trying to draw this from a backpack. In my humble opinion, the front magazine should not extend beyond the rear magazine, because the primary purpose of this surface is a stability surface functioning very similarly to a vertical foregrip. It is not primarily a place to hold extra rounds. And this brings me to an important point about manual of arms here. With few exceptions, this thing can and should run like a pistol in most of its key functions. So reloads are going to be from your spare magazine holster on your belt, just like with a pistol. This is just as fast as reloading from the stability surface and does not require learning any new muscle movements. Now, once you've inserted your mag from slide lock, there are a couple ways to drop the slide. First, you have the slide release, which you may be able to reach if you have large thumbs or an extended mag release, or you can opt to hit it with your support hand thumb after inserting the mag, similar to an AR-15 or even a 1911, depending on how you run it. But my preferred option is to rack the slide with my support hand, mainly because it gives me a much larger surface area to work with, and I want to mitigate any risk of missing the slide release. Now with a regular pistol, there are two ways to rack the slide. You can run your hand over the slide with your thumb pointing back at you, or you can use the press check method where your thumb runs along the slide pointing away from you. For this particular setup, I prefer the press check method because it removes the risk of muzzling my hand, or at least it makes it less likely. Note, this whole time, the brace can stay firmly planted in my shoulder, so I barely have to re-index at all before getting back on target. So to recap, the left hand acts exactly like it would during a pistol reload with a press check style slide rack, and the right performs a three-step yawing motion. First, it tilts right to allow you to insert the mag, and then it tilts left to allow for an easier rack, and then it straightens, and you're back in the fight. Now that's an emergency reload. Tactical reloads are exactly the same as pistol tactical reloads. Again, I must stress, you do not need to touch the emergency magazine in front. It's an emergency magazine. If you try to use this for your tactical reloads, to take this one, put it in the back, and then restock the magazine holder, you're just going to create extra steps for yourself. If you do run out of all your magazines, and you must harvest the spare magazine in front of the gun, you can press this button here behind the mag holder. And interestingly enough, if you push it hard enough, it will drop both mags, which is kind of cool. But again, this is such a niche scenario that I'm not sure I'd waste much time / ammo training this into my muscles. By the way, this button on the other side is not for the emergency mag. It's a mag release for the rear magazine, basically providing AR-15-like controls, but I find it awkward to use. And again, my philosophy when it comes to the manual of arms for this chassis system is to keep everything as close to pistol manual of arms as possible, rather than mixing and matching manuals of arms from different firearms to create something new and ultimately unfamiliar. So I only really reference this button here to point out that it does not drop the front mag as you might think based on its proximity to the front mag. This button operates the rear magazine. So that's reloading. Safety is very similar. It's basically the same as a 1911 or most full-size handgun safeties. It feels very similar to an AR-15 with a radian safety with a 45-degree throw, if you know what I'm talking about. So there's nothing really new here, which is great. Nothing new to learn. And I hate to bring this up, but someone might ask, why do you need a safety on a gun that's basically a pistol? Most modern pistols don't have safeties, so why would we need one here? Basically, the answer is that once you put a brace or a stock on a weapon, you change the nature of it significantly. So the manual safety becomes important. In fact, I'd argue that it becomes necessary. Really, I don't think I can say this better than Pat McNamara, so here's a quick video that he's posted explaining this concept.
It never slows me down a single bit. One may argue, well, you don't put your Glock on safe doing a mag change. Well, all right, Einstein, I get your point. And nor would you ever sling your Glock, nor would your Glock ever hang free from your body. So let me just kill that one right there. If you are still of the opinion that we don't need to use this and it's okay to let this hang free around our body while on fire and loaded, you're an amateur. Please stay off my range and stay out of my lane.
So my argument is that once you put the brace or the stock on the pistol, it becomes essentially a pistol caliber carbine, and that's how you need to treat it. So you need to use the safety just like you would on a carbine. Now, with the Flux, as we will discuss later, you do have the option to holster this weapon, but that's more of a bonus feature that makes this particular PCC cool, but doesn't change the fact that it is essentially a PCC, a pistol caliber carbine, and it should be run with the regular PCC/rifle safety rules. All right, we've done reloading and safety. Now the fun part, the spring-loaded brace. So here's the deal. It's cool, but for me, with this Flux, it hasn't been 100% reliable. In fact, it's 100% unreliable if I deploy it with the gun pointing down. I reached out to Flux and they told me, quote, "The brace sometimes needs some break-in time. You can skip the break-in time by gently taking Scotch-Brite or steel wool to the rails, then applying oil to them. Also, make sure the rails have no curvature to them. If they do, gently pull them apart or vice versa to make them perfectly parallel to each other. Hope this helps. If not, you can send it in for a tune-up." So they stand by the product. They would fix it for me, I think, if I send it in. To me, it's not a big enough deal that I really have felt the need to do that yet. It is frustrating that it doesn't work for me, but that's okay. And sample size of 1, maybe it works for other people more regularly. As I'm training, I just don't trust the spring deployment, and I train around manually deploying it with my hand, which is fine. The spring isn't an issue, and it's a bonus to be able to use in a pinch when you only have one hand. Getting the brace back into the stowed position is surprisingly difficult. It takes a pretty hard slap to get it locked into place, so I often find myself slowly pushing it into my shoulder while pointing the gun down range. This is not ideal, but it's not a big deal either. I'm not sure if they're all this stiff, or maybe I'm just a sissy. I don't know, who knows. Okay, so now that we've reviewed the manual of arms, let's talk about the way I have set this up. Of course, we have to go tip to butt, so we'll start with the Villain Weapon Systems EFL. These are sold exclusively by DARQ Industries, formerly Gun & Gear, but they're made by Villain Weapon Systems. I don't have a relationship with DARQ Industries. Villain Weapon Systems sent this to me to test, so I did not pay for it. I'm still working on testing the EFL. I've had it for a while, but I just haven't been doing quite as much night vision stuff as I would like to be. So bear with me on getting the actual testing results. So far, I like it. It's a cool concept, and it seems very well executed in terms of the fit and finish of the device. The EFL is of course installed on the Streamlight VIR, which I think pairs very nicely with the Raider. It has a laser illuminator combination in IR mode and serves as a flashlight when you switch over to white light. You can't operate the IR laser and the IR illuminator separately. You have to run them together, and then there's no visible laser for the flashlight. But to me, that's not really a big deal. I think this is a very handy lamp/flashlight combination for like $300, so it's a good deal. I haven't noticed any issues with the laser not holding zero, but I don't think I've given it a fair test yet. A little research on the forums seems to indicate that it will hold zero with PCCs and 22 LRs, maybe even 5.56, but most people seem to be running them on pistol calibers. And if it continues to work, like I said, I think it's a very natural fit for this setup. Moving back, I have a Holosun 503CU. Now I know Hop will tell you to stay away from any Holosun models with a solar panel. I bought this before I knew that, and before I really knew anything about guns, so I don't know that I would recommend this particular model or that I would get it in the future from a pure value perspective, but I can say that I've had zero issues with it in the 4 to 5 years that I've owned it. And a friend who has one of the cheaper versions of the Holosun, I think one of the 403 models, one of those Aim Point knockoffs, has had some issues with it. So, you know, tiny sample size, but that's my experience. I've been happy with this particular optic. So that's everything on the Raider, and you can tell it's a pretty sleek setup. I've got a red dot, light, and limited night vision capabilities. And that's a lot for such a small package. Like I tell my wife, the value to volume ratio is off the charts. Now let's talk deployment. You have a number of options for stowing and deploying this weapon. One of my favorites, if a bit niche, is the holster deployment. This particular holster is from Strike 80 Holsters, and it fits the Raider with my EFL installed, which is nice. And when I remove the EFL, it still has good retention. Now the whole package is so large compared to a regular pistol that if you run it on your belt, you'll run it with a drop leg setup. But when you do, man, this thing is awesome. It's just such a fun toy. If you're running this as a sort of primary weapon, it does have a QD sling attachment, which I have not used much, but it seems totally serviceable. The most conventional deployment for the Raider is probably the bag deployment, which is certainly slower than a holster draw, but it can be quick, especially if you have a Vertx bag with a quick access compartment in the back. I think this is the Gamut 2. Just be careful, if you are going to make this your commuter bag, it's actually really easy to forget about this back compartment. That's how compact it is, and it's really a great design, but because it's so out of the way, you can just forget that you have anything in there. And if you're going somewhere where you're not supposed to bring your guns, like an airport, you could get in trouble. People lose guns to airport security all the time, and it's usually people who forget they had it on them. So, what about running the Raider with night vision? It's not an ideal setup for night vision, but I think it's entirely adequate for the concealed PDW philosophy of use. I pretty much subscribe to the brass facts POU on PDWs, a lot of acronyms there, philosophy of use on personal defense weapons. I'll link to his video if you haven't seen it. One of the earlier ones from brass facts that I saw kind of got me into his channel. But that just gives you an idea for the type of use case where you might want to use night vision with this setup. Passive aiming isn't great with the Raider. You can add risers and the like to make it more natural, but that to me tends to take too much away from the streamlined, concealable, and snag-free form factor that I'm going for. In the same way, Flux sells attachments for adding PEC 15s and other attachments to the side, and you can even get holster options that will accommodate this, but it's just too much for this weapon with my vision for its intended use. This is why I like the Streamlight VIR with the Villain Weapon Systems Focuser to provide active aiming capabilities within 50 yards or so, maybe even 100, in a very tiny streamlined package. So here's some closing thoughts. I like the Flux. I think the Flux is the best overall PDW on the market right now. Now take that statement with a grain of salt because it's the only PDW that I've seriously messed with. But there aren't that many viable options, and when you include price in your calculation, it's hard to see any of the competitors coming close. The Raider frame costs around $550, and you can find P320s on the street for $450. I mean street price, I'm not saying actually go and buy it on the street. $450 to $700. So you can be out the door with a few spare magazines for $1,000 to $1,300 compared to the B&T TP9 for over $2,000. That's a $700 difference at least, and there's no way you're getting that much more value from the TP9. The biggest issue with the Flux is it does not suppress well from what I have heard, and that might be a deal breaker for some people. For most folks, if you are looking for a great bag/EDC option or a concealed PDW to have on you in case of societal breakdown or just a road trip across the country, the Flux Raider is a great way to go. That's my take on the Flux Raider. Love mine, wouldn't give it up. I think it's a great value and a fantastic use of my P320 that was formerly just lying around. So, like, comment, subscribe, you know the thing. I'll catch you later.